Thank you for joining us. We are with Community News and they're on their Facebook page. And I want to welcome you. It's been a couple weeks. Hello, Rabbi Friedman, the Ask the Rabbi professional here. Our topic today is going to be on judgment. And we're going to discuss why we judge each other, how we can correct it in our lives. So, Rabbi, welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Susan. It is great to be back here. And now I'm in studio and you're at home. So the tables have turned a little.
Welcome to COVID.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm glad to be back. It's been quite a few weeks, and it's great to be here and to be back in the studio.
It's great to see you. Yes.
Yeah. So things are wonderful. Things are great. Got the year off to a great start, and happy to talk about judgment.
Good. Well, let's move forward then and talk about it. So, there's for me, there's a line between disapproval and judgment. So when I disapprove of somebody, am I judging them?
So if you disapprove of somebody, are you judging? So, I mean, well, I guess we should really talk about what it means to judge somebody. What are we talking about? And is it good or is it bad? Right? We're always making judgment calls all the time. Is this correct or is this incorrect? Right? Is this something that I should do, or is this something, should I have this piece of cake or should I not have this piece of cake? So these are judgment calls that we're making all the time. I think what was the title of today's talk? Why do we judge people? What's the
title? I actually forgot.
It's I see it on the screen here.
Why do we judge each other so much?
Why do we judge each other so much? So when we're talking about, I guess, judging each other, that's where it becomes a bit of a problem. Although I would point out, ironically, I think the title of the class is of today's talk is quite judgmental, don't you think? Anyway, but
I planned it that way.
Okay. Funny. This wasn't my title. Yeah. So why do we? So I think the reason we judge people is because we're constantly judging everything, and some judgments are good, some judgments are important. Whenever we make a decision, whenever we have anything, we're about to say something or do something, we should really make a judgment call. Is this the right thing to say, or is this the right thing to do? But when it comes to judging others, this is already a different area. This is a whole different thing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so we could, so to your point about disapproval or judgment, I would say that we can disapprove of something somebody does because we're making a judgment call on the action. But to be judgmental of other people is to make a call on the person, on the individual. And that's something that we can't do, right? So we have a hard enough time as it is, I think, determining whether a specific action or act or thing that we say is correct or incorrect, right? And that's something
we're judging it against who we are and what we believe.
Well, I'm talking about just making a judgment call on anything. But when you're talking about people, to make a judgment call on somebody, that would be to say that you have the information, or you can make an assessment of that person, what's going on inside, and we don't have that kind of insight into other people. Mm-hmm. So we have to be careful when it comes to judging, that we don't judge people, because we can never know what's going on in that person. So, we're all different. We're all different, and we all have different talents and abilities. We all have different struggles and insecurities, and therefore, our personal lived experience is unique. And so when we're trying to judge people based on what they do, based on the choices they make, we don't know how to take into account their lived experience or their, what's going on, their psyche and what's going on inside that led them to make the decisions they may have made, right? So we apply our sensibilities, we apply our experience to their decisions. And that, of course, is completely incorrect. We're bringing the wrong set of facts to any kind of a judgment. And so we're ill-informed at best when it comes to making a judgment on somebody else.
So what does the Torah say about judgment?
The Torah says, don't judge anybody until you've lived in their shoes, till you've lived their life. Don't judge anybody until you've come to their place.
Okay, and what you were saying before, our background, our individual background, causes us to judge other people. Because basically, when we're judging other people, what they do and say and act is different than what we believe in or are used to, correct?
Well, perhaps it could be different, it could be the same, but again, I'm talking about, judging actions versus, or behaviors versus judging people, right? So to make a judgment on things, even what other people do, there's nothing wrong with judging somebody else's behavior and saying that's inappropriate behavior. That there's no, I should not learn from that behavior, right? I have a friend who said he was in rabbinical school, and he likes maybe a little self-deprecating, and he says that he wasn't exactly a stellar student and role model in his school. And he says one day the dean of the school came over to him, out of frustration. I mean, this guy was just, he had gotten the dean to his wits end, and he said, "You know why we keep you here? So that other students know how not to behave." So, I think there's nothing wrong with seeing if somebody else is doing something that you think is wrong, identifying it, noticing that what they're doing is wrong, and even telling yourself this is wrong, and maybe communicating to the other individual in the right way. Maybe that we can talk about as well, how maybe to communicate that, but to recognize that something is wrong. So to say that I'm non-judgmental to the point that I don't judge anything anybody does, and I don't have an opinion about anything anybody does, that's also incorrect. So we should have an opinion. We should have something to say about anything and everything, and whether it's correct or incorrect. But we have to draw the line between judging the action and judging, or the behavior, and judging the individual that's acting, judging the actor. That's where we have to draw that line. And the reason is because to say that an action or an act is wrong, that should be somewhat, objective. But to start ascribing certain judgments to an individual, now you're purely subjective, because you don't know what went into that, what led to that situation, what led to those circumstances. So
and oftentimes our first impressions are always wrong.
Well, that's certainly true. Right. Our first impression is usually wrong because we don't have information. I think there's is it Covey, Stephen Covey, I think, writes about being on a train and seeing a family, and when the kids were out of control and they were jumping all over the place, and it was very obviously, he was very frustrated and annoyed by it, and kept getting more and more frustrated. And finally, the dad turns to him and says, "Forgive my kids. They're coming from their mother's funeral, and I just don't know what to do with them, and how to so on." And suddenly he switched from contempt and feeling judgmental of this father who didn't have it together, seemingly, to compassion and affection and sympathy. So that because he know what was leading to that, what he was seeing unfold in front of him. And that's true all the time. We can never know. God created all of us, and he created each and every one of us unique, right? We're all, no two people are alike. So in a world of how many billions of people, 7 billion people, everybody is unique. We all have our own unique stamp. And that also means that we each have a unique contribution to make. Now, while we're all held to a certain standard of morality and values, right? You've got the 613 commandments for, in the Torah for the Jewish people. You've got the 7 universal laws for all of humanity. We all are really bound by those laws. At the same time, we all bring our own unique experience to it. And when God, who is the ultimate judge and really the only judge, the only true judge, judges us, he knows he created us. He knows how he created us. He knows how he wired us. He knows the circumstances that he put us into, the time in history he placed us in, and all of those variables. And so what he judges is, did I give my maximum effort? Did I attempt to live a more purposeful, meaningful life? Only God really can answer that question. Sometimes we ourselves might not even be able to answer that truly honestly. But certainly the person sitting across from me, this person sitting next to me, they're certainly not able to answer that question.
We talk about judgment in a negative way, but can there be any positive judgments?
Yeah, well, giving people the benefit of the doubt is a positive judgment for sure. It says about Moses that Moses was the most humble person to walk the earth. That's a verse in the Torah. How could that be? Moses, one of the greatest Jewish leaders, and how could it be that he would be the most humble person? So the sages explain. Is that Where's that coming from?
Yeah, we were a little frozen there for a minute.
Oh, we were frozen? Okay.
Yeah,
Oh.
you were talking about Moses.
Yeah,
And
so the explanation given by the sages is Moses felt that God had given him a specific skill set that made him Moses, right? Made him who he was. He was born into, he had been miraculously saved by the daughter of Pharaoh. He had grown up in the palace. Everything that happened in his life, he saw as really, sort of priming him for the position he was in. And he felt to himself, and this is how he truly felt. When he would think about it, he felt that the position he was in was all thanks to the circumstance that he was handed, that was given to him, that he didn't do anything to earn, that was handed to him by God. And he felt that if anybody else were given the same set of tools and the same set of circumstances, they would maybe be even greater than Moses himself was. So he maybe felt he did the best he can with what he was given, maybe not. But the point is, he felt that anybody else given the same exact, the same exact package would end up being as great, if not greater. And so therefore he was able to look at everybody, even people who he knew to be inferior, right? People with struggles and challenges or people with questionable, moral, character. He knew who they were and he knew who he was in relation to them. But he said, it's easy for me to say and to sit here and judge you when I'm Moses. If you were given the Moses tool chest, you would look far better. So therefore he was able to remain humble. That's a judgment that we should make whenever we see people, is think to ourselves, especially when we see people that are clearly, at least on the surface, seem to be sort of below us in a sense, lower on the social ladder, lower on the economic ladder, on the wherever it is, we come in contact with people that maybe don't seem like our peers, but seem maybe less than, and recognize that they're not less than, that maybe their life situation put them in the position they're in, but they have the tools and the resources. And really most important is that they're just as vital to God's vast eternal plan as you are. So
it's interesting what you just said, because when we judge a person as a bad person, but I may have empathy and compassion for the circumstances which led that person to becoming, like, let's say, a murderer. So like when I went into the prisons, I would have, I would talk to lifers, and I would judge them right away. Oh, they killed somebody. I should stand back. It's scary. They're murderers. But then when you listen to their stories, I don't know if I would have come out any better listening to some of these people's stories.
Right.
So that taught me a big lesson about judging people and judgment. I'm wondering if there's a way in which we can correct that. Can we somehow stop judging people? Is there a way in which we can do that? Or are we automatically, our disposition is automatically to judge somebody right away and then correct it afterwards?
Right. Well, we might, depends. People have different dispositions. Some people are more non-judgmental naturally. Depends on, how you've been living your life. We can train ourselves not to judge people immediately by being mindful. Maybe there's a situation where, maybe before I answer that question, I want to get back to your point about, being in the prisons. It's one thing to say you don't judge somebody, or you can maybe identify with them in a moment of, or when you hear their stories, you say, I don't know if I would have turned out any different. There's a big difference between that attitude and saying that they were justified in what they did, or what they did was okay or not a problem, or that they don't belong in prison, right? You understand there is a significant distinction. Not to judge people doesn't mean that we give people, the freedom to go out and just do whatever they want, whatever they please, and we say, well, look, I can't judge you, so you can go ahead and just, shoot somebody, and I can't judge you for that. No. Shooting people is wrong under all circumstances, right? It's wrong. And that shouldn't be done regardless of your circumstance. But what we're saying is we're differentiating between the activity and the individual, right? And the individual might need to be punished. There are consequences for poor behavior and bad choices that we make, for sure. But that's a distinction. So I hope that distinction is clear. But as far as getting out of that habit, think about maybe your own experience. There must be some kind of experience, a time when you judge somebody only to, and came to some kind of conclusion about them, only to find out later that you're a bit of a fool for having judged them in that way. I was talking.
And I feel so bad when I judge somebody.
Right, and when you think about that, that humbles you, and hopefully it can help prevent you from doing that in the future. I was talking to Rabbi the other day, who was telling me that he'd run into somebody, and in the Hasidic community, I don't remember if one of our early shows we talked about beards. He was saying that there's a rabbi in the community who had this big flowing beard, and one day he sees him and his beard was a lot shorter. So he came over to the rabbi and he said, "Hey, what's the story with your beard?" And he probably made that remark with a little bit of sort of judgment. The tone was probably had that little judgment sort of tune in it. And the other rabbi said, he said, well, it's a long story. We'll talk about it maybe another time. He sort of brushed him off. Anyway, later, this first rabbi finds out that the man who he had approached about his beard was actually then in treatment. He was undergoing chemotherapy, and his beard simply fell out. It didn't look like it, I guess, just the way it was. But obviously, he felt terrible. So he went back. He went back to him. And he tracked him down, and he said, "I want to apologize. I heard, what happened. What you were going through. I wanted to apologize." So he says, "By the way," so the rabbi says to him, "Listen." He dismissed. He said, "Listen, not a big deal." He says, "A lot of people did that." Talking about judgment. He says, "But the truth is, you're the first person to actually apologize. So I appreciate that." But when you think about that, so he's telling me the story. He says, "Listen, that taught him a lesson. He's not going to open his mouth again like that, right?" You see somebody, your first instinct is, "Oh, what's this guy?" But you don't know. You don't know what's happening.
Well, it's also our expectations. When we expect so much from people like as rabbis, and we see a rabbi that's not with the beard and the yarmulke and the whole thing.
So you're saying you like your rabbis bearded? Got it. Okay.
Yeah. And a measuring tape. I like, a certain length of beard and the whole thing. But, when we have expectations of people, that's when we get into that judgment, I find. And I always say, lower your expectations and you won't judge somebody so highly. Well, or you actually won't be disappointed.
I've got to think about that. I think, yeah. Well, in general, we should lower expectations of people, not be. It's maybe lowering expectations in general is a way to not be disappointed. But I don't know. I mean, it's probably a workable strategy for sure. But I don't know if that's the right attitude to adopt. I don't know that we need to hold people to lower standards or lower expectations of anybody. That's not. I think where the problem is. The problem is we think, we look at people doing the same thing, performing the same task, and we just assume that the degree of difficulty was the same for all of them. But we know that that's never the case, right? It's just not the case. The degree of difficulty is not the same for people, even if they're trying to achieve the same task, and even if the result is the same. Some people have to exert more effort than others, right? So that's where we have to focus, is that we never know the degree of difficulty for somebody else. We never know what another person's going through, what their struggles are. That, to somebody, you're high on life. You wake up in the morning, your alarm clock rings, or you don't even need your alarm clock. You spring out of bed, you're ready to tackle the day. There are some people who just getting out of bed is already a huge, huge, huge task and burden, sadly. But that's a fact. And so two people get out of bed, you think they did the same thing, but it's a completely different experience, a completely different act, and requires completely different levels and amounts of strength and courage. So I think that's the point, is when we look at other people, we should give them the benefit of the doubt, first of all. And second of all, we should recognize that we don't know their whole story. And therefore, we should assume what we should do. And that we might be right, we might be wrong. But even if we're wrong, no harm will come from it, which is assume that they're putting in maximum effort, right? And then ask ourselves, are we putting in, maximum effort, or are we just, coasting, mailing it in? So I think let
me ask you another question. So let's say, I see somebody and I'm judging them, and I realize I stop myself from judging them. And then I ask them a question, for example, with the rabbi. Let's just say. As a matter of fact, it's interesting that you said that as a side note, I did see an interview from this old rabbi in Israel. He didn't have any hair, no beard, nothing. He was super Orthodox, and he had, what's that thing where you lose all of your hair?
Alopecia.
He had alopecia. But I'm judging, right? Because he didn't have a beard. So it's really difficult, like for me, if I were to judge somebody, let's say in public, in my mind, I'm judging them, but then I would, in an uncomfortable situation, I would go up to them and have a conversation about my judging them. Do you think it's appropriate for us to say, listen, I just judged you and I'm sorry for it. I want to know what's going on with you on, for example, what I judged you for.
Okay, so
is that too much, do you think?
I'm always a big fan of direct communication. I'm very frontal like that, direct communication. If there's something going on, just go and communicate it. Now, it's gotten me probably in trouble sometimes because sometimes it's not the right approach. But it's definitely an approach. The only thing is I would caution you that I would say it would be appropriate to say, hey, I judged you and I'm apologizing. That's fine. But to say, I want to know what's going on with you, as first of all, you're already passing judgment, saying, well, let me see if my judgment was correct. That's first of all. Okay. And second of all, why do you need to know what's going on with them? It's not relevant information for you, right? Okay. Unless you're prepared to help them or you're in position to help them, you don't need to know, and nor should you know what's going on with somebody else. I'll tell you, there's the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Chassidic movement, says that, and this is, by the way, maybe a good strategy to not judge people. Mm-hmm. He says that whenever you see somebody else, you're looking in the mirror. Every time you look at somebody else, you're actually looking in the mirror, which means that when you, or particularly when you see somebody else, acting in an inappropriate way, you see a character flaw in somebody else, you're looking in a mirror. That's the first. That should be your reaction, which is, so why is that? The reason is because since we love ourselves and give ourselves the benefit of the doubt, because while we're busy, we're great at judging other people, we never judge ourselves, right? So we always justify our bad behavior. And as a result, we're always going to downplay or minimize whatever character flaws or mistakes that we're making. As long as we can get away with minimizing them and, sort of deflecting from them, we're going to do that and be completely comfortable with that. But the other guy, he's got an anger problem, right? I don't have a temper. He has a temper, right? So what happens is that God shows you somebody else lose their temper. And you look at that, and since it's another person, the first thing you say is, oh, how ugly, what a terrible person. It's anger. And look how ugly that is. Says the Baal Shem Tov, he says, what right do you have to see somebody else in a weak moment? There's no reason that you should be seeing somebody else in a vulnerable position. So the reason you see them is not to see them, but actually what you're being shown is your own character that needs to be improved, right? So one of two things would be correct. If you see somebody acting in a way that you find yourself wanting to judge them, one of two things is going on. Either A, you have that problem yourself, and this is just a way of being pointed out to you in an objective way, so you could say, oh no, this really is ugly, maybe I do need to work on myself. So the first thing is to be introspective, to look in the mirror, essentially, and say, 1 second, what is this telling me about myself? If you legitimately don't have anything remotely close to whatever issue this other person has, then the reason you see it is because maybe that means that you're in position to help them. Right now, more often than not, we'll find that there's some improvement we have to, there's a way we have to go on our own. But if you're from the rear view and you see something and there's no semblance of that inside of yourself in any way, shape, or form, then you probably are in position to help them. So then maybe go over to them and say, hey, I judged you. I don't know why, but maybe let's have this conversation. Maybe you're the right person in that spot to actually help them. I would say 99.9% of the time that won't be the scenario. That won't be the case. But it might be.
Well, also, if we don't see something in somebody else, we don't see it in ourselves.
Well, that's the point. Exactly. Yeah. Seeing in somebody else is a way of it being pointed out to you that's what you have in yourself. Because not seeing in somebody else, you'll never see it in yourself. It's a blind spot that you have. Yeah. Certainly.
Yeah. All right. So
I think
no, go ahead. Really.
I was going to say, so I think those are the strategies to employ. Recognize that everybody's vital. You are not the center of the universe. Everybody is here with a purpose and a mission, and is here for a reason. And so therefore there's nobody that's everybody's got their own mission, their own path, and we're not the ones who put them here, and therefore we're not the ones who charted their path for them or determined what it is. And for God's vast eternal plan, he creates us all with different circumstances on different levels and different places, and gives us the tools to be able to fulfill our own unique purpose. So let's not start passing judgment from our own experience and somebody else on their own unique experience. That's one thing. Another thing is that perhaps, the other person wasn't afforded the same opportunities or given the same gifts or the same the same possibilities that I was given. And so therefore, if they were given the same resources that I have, they would maybe look far better. So I'm already suspending judgment. Mm-hmm. And finally, when you see something that you don't like that's leading you to judge somebody, remember that you're actually looking in the mirror. Take a look in the mirror and see maybe there's something here that I need to improve and correct as well.
And so judgment is normal. It's who we are. There's a reason why we judge people.
Judgment is good when we're judging whatever we're about to do. We should always be in that mode. We should always be thinking before we do anything. Everything we do should be deliberate, should be purposeful. And so we're constantly making those judgment calls, constantly. But that's on the things we do and the choices we make. It's not about judging other people and their character. Right? Those are judgments that are not okay. And those are judgments that we're never really able to make. Yes, we have courts that have to judge people and try people for crimes committed. That's a whole nother conversation. But that's necessary and vital to a functioning society. But in terms of us passing, moral judgment on people, and judging them and deciding that we come to a conclusion about their character, that's never okay.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Rabbi. That was wonderful. I like that.
Great.
Something to live by.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you. And thank you for joining us on Ask the Rabbi. I hope you guys pass this along to everybody. And we will see you next week on another topic.
Do we have that yet or no? You want to tease it or we haven't?
I don't have a topic yet. Any suggestions or anything?
No, I think we'll surprise the audience. That'll get them coming
back.
The
audience can surprise
us. Or they can
us.
chime in. Yeah, sure. Chime in, give us some suggestions. Great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Rabbi, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.